entertainment, the Battle of the Bands. The only thing we don't have this year is a football game, which is kind of odd type thing to have. They have a classic without a game, but I guess that's the way we're rolling. But also this week we have our superstar panel, Attorney Milton of LA and Attorney Vanita Banks. And we have so many different news items in the news this week that are so significant in terms of our democracy. Our call-in number is 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. And that covers all our different media, whether you're on Facebook, or you're on the radio stations, the 10 stations, or otherwise. You can call in and discuss these issues with us today. Now, having said that, this week we had an incredible announcement out of New York. We have multiple investigations going on involving the 45th president of the United States. But one of the most jarring ones that I've ever seen was one filed by the AG, Attorney General Letitia James out of New York. She filed a 200-plus page civil complaint against Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, and his adult children. And when I started reading it, I couldn't finish it because it was like reading a crime novel. You had a detailed analysis of crimes being committed by the former president of the United States in a civil complaint. But let me just give you a quick background as to why I'm covering this subject. I was involved in a number of jury trials, but when I'm out and about, you see me in the grocery store, you'll start talking to me about the show. And so let me explain to you again this issue about Mar-a-Lago as to the people that came up to talk to me about that, why I took this position. Here's what I meant. When the president took secret documents from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, and these are confidential documents that could have sources and methods to protect our people that protect us. So we have CIA agent planted in certain countries and things like that. That's important intelligence. We pay billions of dollars for intelligence. And so we protect that intelligence by keeping those documents only available for a few people to see. Well, the president says, now this is equivalent to what he said. So imagine one day that you decided to go out and you got a lot of food, but when you got home, you discovered that you need another refrigerator. But you didn't have the money to buy the refrigerator, so you go next door and steal your neighbor's refrigerator and you stuck part of your food in the refrigerator. Now, it sounds kind of goofy, right? So they find out about it, so they come out and they confiscate the refrigerator that you stole. Your defense is that, hey, I got my own food in that refrigerator. Now, that's how ridiculous the former president defense is. In other words, he take documents that doesn't belong to him, and he said, well, I got some of my documents in the stolen documents, and so I want to have a special master. And that's not going so well for him right now. But that's how ridiculous this whole thing is. And but it was kind of bothering me that it was so goofy what they were doing. And I think most people miss how significant of a flim-flam they're talking about this whole thing involves. But in any event, having said that, Counselor, do you have an opportunity to take a look at that civil lawsuit filed by Letitia James at AGA in New York? What do you think?
I have not read it, Nate. Sorry to say, my week has been full.
Yeah. Attorney Bates, you get a chance to look at it?
Absolutely. And good morning, Attorney Lee and Attorney Grimes. Yes, I had an opportunity to review the 222-page complaint that was filed, and many of us witnessed the press conference this week led by New York Attorney General Letitia James. The 222-page complaint is the culmination of over three and a half year investigation that commenced after his former attorney, Michael Cohen, testified before Congress regarding President number 45's shady and unlawful conduct. Again, this was a 3.5 year investigation where the Attorney General's office reviewed thousands of documents, interviewed over 65 people, and as a result, filed a lawsuit alleging misrepresentation and fraud in connection with the Trump organization, former President Trump, and his children and others, filing of false financial statements, which grossly inflated his personal and the Trump organization's personal net worth by billions of dollars. And of course, in connection with obtaining, bank loans to fund his commercial real estate and other ventures, including Mar-a-Lago, his golf courses, and the Trump International Hotel, which was recently sold this May for over $100 million.
What was astonishing to me is that the complaint set forth in detail each of the fraudulent financial transactions. And I think that most people don't realize what that entails. When you take out a mortgage, for example, you represent to the bank and the federal government that insures these that your income is accurate and your assets are accurate. And it tells you that if you make a false application, it's a federal crime. It tells you that on the application. And so what we see in this situation is that the former president apparently does that on every financial deal that he's conducted over his professional career looked like. It was just astonishing to me that you see assets after asset that was grossly over-evaluated, starting with his penthouse apartment in his tower, that he somehow, it was just crazy how he did that. He first said it was like 30,000 square feet. It was about 10,000 or less. And then the value was highest than any apartment in the history of America. It was just crazy stuff. And it's all in plain view. What I don't get for the life of me is that if we become so polarized in America until we now see two dramatically different justice systems, Attorney Grind, what is going on here? It's readily ascertainable that any of those financial institution allegation would result in a minimal prison sentence of 3 years. 3 years, and he's got 100 of them. So I don't get it. Are we now in an American justice system that now we have is coming to the light that we have a totally separate justice system for the rich and famous versus the ordinary citizen?
Well, I'm astonished that I don't want to be that cynical because you may miss my humor. So let me be straightforward. This man did not hide this. This man boasted of being able to do this. This man, his books and I won't say his books are in the public view, but everybody could see, any banker coming out of high school and thinking about being a banker could see this particular piece of property can't be worth $1 million. It's 100,000. I mean, his lies were obvious to the naked eye, but they nodded and they accepted, they meaning the people who were giving him loans. It was like they expected something at the end of the trip they were taking with him. It's not like it was hidden and secreted and not available for people to see, was it? Was it pretty much, isn't the stuff pretty much in the open? Come on,
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily get tricked or swindled with this lie. That was a lie, but hell, it was easily discernible. So I think it goes deeper than Trump. It goes with those he was working with who knew these properties were vastly overvalued, and they went along. Maybe they expected something in the end, a trip on his jet or vacation with their in-laws for 2 weeks somewhere on Trump. What we see out here with Tom Girardi, the lawyer who fell out of fame, sometime noted and voted as the biggest plaintiff lawyer, personal injury lawyer in California. They find out that he had embezzled or has embezzled millions of dollars of plaintiff's money, settling cases and never giving the money, paying for judges' campaigns, contributing to politicians' campaigns from some of our most respected politicians, Obama, Clinton, many Democrats' campaigns. Some people have given whatever he donated to them, even 10 years ago, have given that money to social causes now, but it's an acknowledgement that Tom spread his thefts around to others, and donating campaign money and sponsoring elections. So yeah, we have, excuse me, and Tom Girardi boasted of that. I mean, I hate to talk about it because he's a fellow brother and he's a lawyer and I know him, but what he did to the little people, people who were victims of accidents or other types of injury causing events, just kept the money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Nate. And people are suffering that was expecting this money. You follow me? So
Terrible.
yeah, and but for your question, I do see I was reading in the paper, and forgive me for speaking about Kobe. I mean, I'm just citing what someone wrote this week about the two justice system and how Kobe paid off the alleged rape in Colorado. I don't know what happened in that hotel room, but the lawsuit in Orange County and the prosecution was dropped and he went on. I think he was a phenomenal basketball player, but look at the guy that owns the New England Patriots. They caught him in the house with the,
with his pants down.
Now, Vanita's on here, Nate, Vanita's on the show. But they caught him with his pants down, Vanita. And it's a double system. It's a double system, y'all. And that's, God, it's, we got a case going down where we see that, and the evidence is there. In Colorado, they're gathering evidence from 8 different prosecutors across the state. In California, we have a lawsuit, the Racial Justice Act, to show that minorities, especially Blacks, receive harsher punishment for the same crime that whites commit. And they're collecting this data now in Colorado on these various statistics and admitting, for some reason, whites don't get charged with these events as much as Blacks. And when they get charged for a lesser crime. And when they get sentenced, they don't get sentenced as harshly as Blacks. And the statistics are there. I've said this before. Out of 100,000 white men, 127 are in prison. Out of 100,000, every 100,000 Black men in California, 1,700 are in prison. So what caused that disparity? Is it that we are more criminal oriented? I'm going on, I'm very, but anyway, so yeah, there is a two-tier system here. It's obvious.
Well, Attorney Banks, you know, he makes a good point, but what bothers me though is the depth of the allegations that the New York City prosecutor decided to drop the case would amount to clear evidence of fraud, clear evidence of fraud. And so the question though is, does the wealth of the person, the connection that a person has, or in this case, is the former president tantamount to crime balls where they also have the ability to control local prosecutor? What is going on there? I don't get it.
Vanita, let me take your moment, and please, just for a point, Nate. I sued Don King back in the late 90s because he stole money from Mike Tyson and the two managers, John Horn and Roy Calhoun. We got it. Don King said, "You'd never beat me in New York, Milton Drive. I guarantee you that. You're wasting your time." And he was right. We filed the lawsuit and it was dismissed on its face without us getting to court. We appealed that and the Court of Appeals sustained it. It was dismissed. And it was like, what the hell happened here? So I think money speaks loudly and corruption is in our justice system and we ignore it. I'm sorry, Vanita, go ahead.
Thank you, Attorney Grimes, and absolutely. And you make quite eloquent points that I agree with wholeheartedly. And again, this is no surprise. And in fact, this is how President number 45, has conducted his entire business career. And as you stated, wide open and in public for everybody to see. You'll recall the hotels and casinos that over a quarter of a century ago that were held by the Trump organization and Mr. Trump. These were in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
And Mr. Trump bankrupted, those Atlantic City casinos, but he still earned millions and millions, of dollars. And in fact, as he was running, for president, he boasted of his success in Atlantic City and how he had, outwitted the Wall Street firms that financed his casinos, and just rode, the value of his name, to riches. And I remember years and years ago, as a businessman, when many of these commercial real estate holdings were failing, and Mr. Trump went to these bankers and said, "Hey, we can all go down together, right? You're going to lose all of your money, or you need to give me some more money." And guess what? They did. And so again, this is not new and has been, bragged about, openly for the Trump organization's entire career. And when Attorney Lee references, mob involvement, I was thinking, reflecting on this case this week, brought by this social engineer, Letitia James, attorney Letitia James, who in the Houstonian, Charles Hamilton Houston, who was a dean of the Howard Law School and social engineer, who stated that a lawyer that is not a social engineer is a parasite, on society. But I was thinking that, and we have often talked about, and there's a plethora of litigation pending against President number 45 and the Trump organization. And many times we talk about, so far, this former president, has been Teflon. But I'm just wondering whether or not this case, which by the way has been referred to federal authorities as well as the Internal Revenue Service, whether this case will potentially go down, in history as remember Al Capone, that finally Al Capone was brought down by, similar allegations that are made in this case, fraud and misrepresentation and violations of the Internal Revenue Code. And so we'll see. What do you think?
Well, in my own practice, I had one of my clients committed one of the offenses that the former president, just one count, not the 50 or so that the former president, he got 42 months. And another client committed something similar on 2 occasions than the former president did. He got 4 years. And so I don't want to mention anybody's names here publicly, but here's my problem. It is terribly discouraging to see that the average person go out there every day to try to buy a home, and they go to a financial institution, and then they're denied credit because they're trying to do the right thing. They pay their bills, they work every day, they feed their family, but they can't get credit at a typical bank. Then you find out that people have rigged the system so these millionaires and billionaires, they can get access to these credit lines by simply fabricating the value of property. Now you got to understand, when we go out to get loans on real estate, you have an appraisal process, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how is it possible that he can get an appraisal to appraise property 5 to 10 times the value of the property? So it's not just the fact that the former president is committing a crime. There's a whole slew of people in the process that goes along with it. And that's what troubles me. You don't just have him doing it. You have the person at the bank, you have the person that does the appraisal, you have the underwriters. There's a whole slew of folks that are involved in this process. This is tantamount to a gigantic organized crime type scheme. It's just incredible to me.
I'm not laughing at you, Nate. It's just, I've seen it throughout.
But yet, we see in Baltimore, and this is being raised by one of our callers, we're seeing Baltimore City State's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, being tried, and her trial has been postponed until early next year. She's being charged with perjury and making a false statement on a loan application.
Right.
She's been indicted, and her case is set to go to trial, in March of this year. And she's being represented by National Bar Association attorney, A. Scott Bolden.
Yeah, but see, that's my problem. We're talking about a single property, and yet they decide to charge a sitting lawyer who's a district attorney with felonies just for a single transaction. And then we look at this complaint and we look at every real estate transaction he's been involved with have a similar pattern.
Yeah.
And so when I look at that, it made me realize that the demarcation between the rich and the poor is greater today than probably has ever been. When I can see a person like this is doing activity that's similar to an organized crime boss, I just don't get it. And I don't know whether people realize, I'm not being cynical, how significant this is. How do you go about getting all these folks into the hierarchy involving the financial transaction to go along with this? Someone in the process should be alerted and say, this is not right. This is a crime. How does everybody go along with this? I mean, I've done some real estate transaction, and I'm thinking, how in the world do you get all these folks to go along with this if it's not tantamount to an organized crime scheme? I don't get it.
I do voter rights law, Nate, and I've done about 4 or 6 trials out here in California. We just won one 2 years or so ago against the city of Santa Monica. But getting into that law and filing lawsuits against cities for using at-large election system as opposed to district election systems, which will give minorities a voice in the councils and things that run the government. There's a book called The Color of Law. The Color of Law. And when you read it and you see the racism and the discrimination of the housing authorities from the federal government on down, how they absolutely block minorities from certain areas, even when they were living in this area and they decide this is too good of an area and they ease them out and make them so that they can't come back in, can't get loans for the homes in that area and send freeways through your neighborhood and wipe it out and displace you and send you back to Mississippi and Alabama down there. And it's all legal. It's all within the codes that they now, or the statutes that they have now written. And it's like, God, it is so systematic and it's just the law. And it's practiced in your face, in the open. And it's so blatant, it seems like it numbs us to the wrong of it. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
In the Mosley federal criminal indictment, Miss Mosley, who lost her, bid for reelection to the state's attorney's position in Baltimore, by the way, as this criminal indictment proceeded. I mean, this is a 4-count indictment where they're claiming that the 4-count indictment states that she claimed to have experienced financial hardship due to the COVID-19 pandemic in order to withdraw from the city's deferred compensation plan on 2 different occasions, receiving, $40,000 and $50,000. Now, I was thinking about that, and I'm not a pension plan expert, but it's like her own money, right? I mean, that's the money. But so they said, right, that she falsified, the application, and that she actually, received more money or more compensation, in, her role as state's attorney, at that time, rather than experiencing a reduction in income in 2020, that her gross income actually increased. And I could argue, against that, including how it's being argued they're wanting to bring in a forensic, accountant to show that her net worth actually decreased during that time frame. And then they also are saying she made false statements on a loan application related to 2 vacation homes in Florida. But again, singular transactions. And here we just have, hundreds of transactions throughout, a career that we're looking at in this 222, page complaint. And so the injustice is stark.
Well, one of my problems, though, is that was the Trump Justice Department, and that when he took office, he terminated all of the U.S. attorneys, right? Now, the Biden administration probably should have done the same thing, but they did not. In fact, they still have holdover Trump appointees. So you still have a large segment of the Justice Department. See, as I recall, only about half of those U.S. attorney jobs have been filled by the Biden administration. And because they've been focused on the judicial appointment. They've done very well with the judicial appointment, but they've not appointed, for example, U.S. Marshals. They've done a terrible job on that. And they've not really correctly replaced all the U.S. attorneys. And so the district U.S. attorney would make a decision, and that shows the glaring inequities of this process. So this attorney, African American, who takes money out of her own pension account. Now you got to remember, when you do a deferred type compensation program under the tax code, what occurs is that when you do a withdrawal of proceeds, there's a taxable distribution at that time. So there's a tax penalty. So if you took out $100,000, you pay a penalty for taking the money out early. You pay taxes. And that's why I don't get that. You take your own money out, and so you're going to get charged with a crime, and then you pay taxes on stuff that you took money out of. I just think that that's a little bit overreach. When I looked at the allegation, I'm thinking, if you start doing that, then every time somebody make a withdrawal from a pension account, are you going to be monitoring that also? Or is this selective type prosecution? Because people every day take money out of their pensions account before they reach age of retirement. It's an ongoing process. It could be,
as you know, Attorney Lee, it used to be what, a 10% penalty?
yeah,
Or
it's a penalty.
whatever the penalty is for, quote, early withdrawal from, a deferred compensation plan. So I don't get it. Well, I get it. We're talking about, the unequal application of the law.
So my problem though is what can we do to fix a justice system that is now being tilted more so towards the rich and the famous? And then you look at a situation down in Mississippi that's been in the news lately, where the famous Hall of Famer football player Brett Favre, the poorest state in the country, Mississippi, they take money that's dedicated for social welfare, food stamp, housing for poor folks in Mississippi who are making less than $10,000 a year, and they gave the money to the multimillionaires for speeches he never made and things like that. And he's not indicted. He's not indicted. They say, well, if you pay back the $1.4 million that we gave you to give speeches you never gave, then all is forgiven. Now, you can compare and contrast that to Miss Mosby, who took her own money. They're prosecuting her for taking her own money, but not Brett Favre in Mississippi for stealing somebody else's money. Why?
And this is an absolute travesty. This is an absolute travesty, and just, stark examples of the inequities in the justice system. And Attorney General James, in her prayer for relief, is asking that over $250 million be disgorged, benefits that the Trump organization, former president and his children, have gained, that those benefits be disgorged, and that in the amount of $250 million, even though the administration has been trying to, pay this money back, over a period. They've been trying to repay, this unjust enrichment benefits back. And Attorney General James is saying, the fact that you're repaying it does not absolve you from the massive benefits that you have gleaned. For example, the Trump organization won the bid to transform the post office in DC to the Trump International Hotel. Now it was sold for over $100 million, just this year. But the obtaining of, that bid, through what the GSA says was one of the most competitive bids, in history, resulted in the Trump organization, winning that bid and ultimately selling that hotel, for millions and millions of dollars. So that's unjust enrichment, based on all of the false statements and misrepresentations that have been made about his net worth and the net worth of his many real estate property holdings over many, many years. This was a methodical investigation over 3.5 years, where, for example, Mar-a-Lago, which we hear about, where the classified documents were seized, it was valued at over $700 million, but it should have been valued at $75 million. Another example, of the failure to truthfully designate on financial statements over this period is 2011 to 2021, the actual net worth of his real estate holdings, including, golf courses, as well as as you stated and summarized, Attorney Lee, his penthouse in Trump Tower and real estate holdings, across the nation.
Well, that doesn't compare to the criminal conduct and the crime committed by one of our council people or supervisors out here in LA, Mark Ridley Thomas. He benefited a whole $100,000 from USC. And forgive me for not knowing all the details of it, but he's being prosecuted by the federal government for that wrongful deed that is, I'm being facetious, but is minute compared to what Donald Trump has done. But they don't seem to be that hesitant to prosecute Black officials and Black people for crimes that other people just walk away with daily.
Well, I'm troubled by that because he, what he had to do, I think, was the admission into USC, where they would get money to get certain students admitted into the university there.
That's a different issue. It was something dealing with the social school. The dean of the social school, forgive me for not knowing these facts any better at this time, Nate. He made a deal with the dean of the social school, who pled guilty to it too. She did, she's white, but the whole affair was over $100,000. Something that could have been reimbursed, could have been whatever, but not criminalize this man for what he did. And I don't know the details of it now that I brought it up. I'm sorry about that.
What we see locally is that our local prosecutor is taking on this with a challenge. What he's doing is that they're looking at their sentencing to make sure that they're equitable, that for crimes committed, like, for example, if you commit a crime outside of Indianapolis and you get probation, and then the same crime you find out here that you get 5 years, there should be equity in the sentencing. In other words, they should be more uniform.
Right.
If the facts and the evidence is the same, then the punishment should be the same. It shouldn't be a glaring disparity. And what you're talking about is what we're seeing on a regular basis. It's almost like the haves versus have-nots, they have special privileges. And so what we're trying to do locally is that we're trying to have justice in the justice system and make people accountable the same. And that's the way American democracy should work. regardless of whether you're rich or poor, ultimately when you come before our court system to be held accountable, it still has to be fairness in the process.
Yes.
So you can't be adjudicated a more severe sanction for doing the same thing than your counterpart. And that's what I'm troubled by today. I see a bigger disparity now in our system. When I go about the different courts, I went to a certain court in a certain county here in Indiana, and the African-American Black population, males, is maybe 7% of the county, but there are 50% of the people in that local jail.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
50%, and they're charged with these drug offenses, petty drug offenses, marijuana, things like that. And it troubled me that all these young men are in jail for these offenses that are nonviolent in nature. And they're treated like they're a homicide or crimes of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point I'm making is that when you see the guy who became the president of the United States, he became the model for how the rich and famous get away with things versus the ordinary citizen. But in this case here, it was in such plain view, until you say that somewhere along the line, it should have been a red flag and he should be held accountable, whether you're talking about appraisals, you're talking about closing agent, all along the line. You have a trail of people who was aware of this misconduct, yet nothing was done.
Yep, that's the point I was trying to make earlier, Nate. It's these statistics aren't lying, and they're collecting this data from, like I say, in Colorado. We've collected it here in California. Something is wrong with the end picture. We got to do something about it.
Well, there's one other thing that bothered me. I forgot to ask Attorney Banks, because she's in Chicago. In that case where the guy did the mass shooting, is there any new development on that case that's locally? I forgot to ask you about that earlier, Attorney Banks.
You're speaking of the Highland Park mass shooting on July 4th. And what I've seen in terms of what's been happening is more of a focus on the healing process of the victims, and grants being made to all of the businesses that were disrupted as a result of the mass shootings, and just emphasis on the healing and care of the victims. We saw one brave little boy who was shot that day, left rehabilitation and is now at home. Many more years to go in terms of his rehabilitation and healing. But the focus right now is on the survivors and their families, and just healing the community. And as you know, the Lake County State's Attorney immediately returned in criminal indictments, 7 of them for first-degree murder, and has promised even more charges will be filed in the future.
Are they seeking the death penalty?
That I need to take a look at.
We don't have the death penalty issue in Illinois.
We do not have it. You're absolutely right. There is no death penalty in Illinois. And so it would be life imprisonment.
Oh, I see. Well, there's one thing that bothered me that's been in the news that we didn't talk about. And I watched in horror, and I saw the National Bar now trying to raise money for the people in Jackson, Mississippi for their contaminated water. So you have an urban city in America that doesn't have drinking water, and because they have a system. And then you look and see that the city is filled with African American, about 80-some%, and the state does not give the resources necessary to maintain drinking water. And when I look at that in horror, you realize this disparity, this gap between resources, between the haves and the have-not. It's everywhere. It's all around us. And I was thinking that at some point you have sick children and things like that because they've been drinking contaminated water. That could affect you for a generation in the future. Now,
well, we unaffected. We lawyers and doctors in the Black community, we aren't affected by this type of thing. So I guess we close our eyes to it a lot, Nate. And that's the shame of what's happening.
Well, we see this, you know, absolutely, as you stated, Attorney Lee, in Flint, Michigan, you know, with the lead in the water that was discovered after many, many years that result in so many, you know, injuries to young people and entire communities. You know, the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis is just the latest example of, you know, environmental racism, you know, that we're seeing, you know, across the nation, and the disparities, the racial and economics and socioeconomic disparities that we see, you know, across the board, both with respect to, you know, healthcare, housing, education, and social justice. I can say a glimmer of hope are attorneys that have been trained in the Houstonian tradition that I mentioned earlier, social engineers like Letitia James, Attorney James, and like attorneys Milton Grimes and Nathaniel Lee, who every day speak truth to power on behalf of our communities. It takes courage, it takes strength to do this. And I applaud your efforts, counselors.
Well, one, as a point of departure before we leave today, I want to remind the folks, if you or your loved one were in the military or visited for more than 30 days in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, don't forget, we've been talking about that on our station recently. That is that you have claimed the government passed special legislation to extend the statute of limitation for people who have been injured. That applies to you as a relative who visited there, as a vendor who worked there, as a soldier who was in the military. No matter what your relationship was, so long as you were there at Camp Lejeune up until 1989, you could have a potential claim for the contaminated water there. We're talking about Jackson, Mississippi, but the water at Camp Lejeune caused cancer and a lot of disease processes, about 20 or so disease process. And so if you're on the East Coast area, contact me. On the West Coast, contact Attorney Grimes. But I'd like to thank each and every one of you for listening to our show today. Next week, we'll have another site issue before you. But today, we focus on the disparity in our American justice system. And I hope that each of you take this as an opportunity to go out and vote like you've never done before, because democracy is on the ballot this fall, and make sure that you get your neighbors, your friends, and everybody around you to vote. Thank you, and may God bless and keep you until we talk once again.